All right. Welcome to the Monday noon Bible study as we are on chapter 23 of Luke. And we'll hopefully finish up unless I get long-winded. We'll hopefully finish up this week or next week. And then based on just some interest input that we had in the room, we'll probably start our next study. And it'll be a lengthy one too. We're going to look at the minor prophets in the Old Testament. That's a series of 12 books. A lot of them are similar type prophecies, but we'll take them one book at a time. And
they're kind of small.
Yeah. And some of them are short and all, and so we'll do that. And if we get a little too much prophecy for a while, we'll take a break and do one other book and then come back to them. But we will work our way through them. I anticipate it'll probably be our summer break that we get a break from. Okay, so we're in Luke 23, and this is just remember at the end of 22 last week, we saw Jesus being arrested. We saw Judas kissing him with the kiss of betrayal. Jesus being arrested, being taken to Caiaphas' house, the high priest, and Peter hanging out in the courtyard. Peter being confronted 3 times as to being a Galilean and one of Jesus' disciples, and Peter denying it. And then the rooster crows, and Peter runs away in anguish. And it's important to remember that because there's going to be a time back after Jesus' resurrection where Jesus reconciles that bit of betrayal by Peter, and it just shows God's grace. And God's, no matter how bad we goof up, we can always receive grace from God. But so we're starting chapter 23, verse 1 says, "Then the whole company of them arose and brought him before Pilate." This being all those that were doing I call it a mock trial before the Jewish deal. It wasn't a mock trial, but it wasn't a very legalistic, realistic one, but it was a trumped up trial. In the Old West, we would have called it a lynch mob, something like that. Mm-hmm. Then the whole company of them arose and brought him before Pilate, and they began to accuse him, saying, "We found this man misleading our nation, forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar, and saying that he himself is Christ, a king." And Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered him, "You have said so." And then Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowds, "I find no guilt in this man." But they were urgent, saying, "He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea and from Galilee, even to this place." Okay. Initial reading of that, what blares out at you?
Say it again.
That they bring him, and the charges are, and what is, they say, "Hey, he says we are not to give tribute to Caesar." Wait a minute.
He didn't say that.
He didn't say that. He said, "Show me a coin. Whose face is this? It's Caesar. Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar." And so they're lying on that. Okay. And then they say that, and the second one, they say he's stirring up our nation, misleading our nation, and forbidding us to give. Well, what they mean by misleading is he's not following in line with their theology, or he's not following in line with their dogma or their agenda or their will. He's not. And so therefore he's stirring the people up the wrong way. I guess it might never considered that he would be stirring them up the right way, and they had been stirring the people up the wrong way all along. You know what I mean? That's usually the way it is with those that are in power tend to define themselves as being correct and right, and those that aren't are usually the troublemakers. Okay, and Jesus is not in Now, Jesus was in a power position in that he was God and he was man, but by the earth standards, he was not in a power position. He came as he's a lowly itinerant prophet, teacher. He has no wealth, no political clout, and yet he has a sway with the masses. Okay, and so they bring it. So they throw this thing about Caesar to kind of double enforce their weak case. And then they also, I think it's funny, and they say, he says he's a king of the Jews, okay? And Pilate asked him, are you king of the Jews?
If you say
Okay,
so.
yeah, and he says, you have said so. You know, and which I as a kid, I always wondered what an answer like that meant. You know, well, you say so. Why didn't Jesus say yes? Okay, or why didn't, you know? And to a certain extent, that is what he said, right? Well, you say so, or if you say so, you know what I mean? If you say so. But if he was truly king of the Jews, they're certainly not following him. Okay. If he was, he did come to be king, and that's when King of Kings, Lord of Lords, and King of my heart. But he's a king that not by political power, so to speak, and so he's not going to be one that Pilate would recognize as king. And Pilate must have been a pretty astute guy. I mean, there's a lot. You know, Luke has a way of condensing everything down, but I have a feeling a lot more went on because Pilate says, "Look, I find no guilt in this man." Okay, I find no guilt in this man. But they were urgent, saying they were urgent. They were, which is probably a nice way of saying they were really tweaked up to make sure that Pilate would do things their way. Okay, they were enraged. I think would probably even be a minor. Enraged against not so much Pilate, but they were enraged against Jesus. Okay,
But
go ahead.
weren't a lot of people in this crowd, people who had been following him?
Well,
and-
we don't
and
know.
wanting to know
Yeah, we don't know if
about
his
him?
disciples, how many
Or-
were there,
yeah.
but
I meant in general.
there were all the religious leaders, probably the Sanhedrin and all them, because it says they went as a company, a whole company. And you probably have those that are like Peter that are being silent because, you know, but what happens? Jesus said you strike the shepherd and the sheep go astray. You know what I mean? And what do we see when they arrested Jesus? The disciples just scattered. You know, and Peter followed a little bit, and John, we believe it was John, followed. And so anyway, as he stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea and Galilee, even to this place. And when Pilate had heard this is verse 6. When Pilate had heard this, he said, he asked whether the man was Galilean. And when he learned that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him over to Herod, who was himself in Jerusalem at the time. Pilate's a pretty smart guy. He's like, this is not going to end well for whoever's involved at this. This is the Jewish people tend to be, and I'm putting words in my Pilate's mouth, but they were a difficult region to govern for the Romans. Okay, they were very. A lot of them were religious zealots. They were very easy to stir up, I guess is what I'm saying, and so he's like, oh, I don't want, you know, and he finds out, oh, this isn't in my jurisdiction. You know, what happens when, oh, it's not my job. I'll pass it on to whoever's the job it is, okay? That's called passing the buck is what my mom used to call that, passing the buck. He goes, oh, is he from Galilee? Okay. Not that, I guess the way they define jurisdiction is a little different because the people here had said he's even stirring up to this place, okay? And so that's probably what when he sends it to Herod, Herod's going to say, yeah, but he's doing it in your place too, and sends it. So let's see what's going on. And he sent him over to Herod, who was himself in Jerusalem at that time. Why do you think Herod was in Jerusalem?
Probably because of the trial. No,
The trial?
I mean that was going on.
What did go a little bit more? You almost got it.
Because of the uprising he was stirring?
What's going on? Just the night before, they did what meal that became the Lord's Supper?
Passover or?
Passover.
Passover.
And Herod was very much a follower of the Jewish religion, and in fact, he did a lot of work on the temple. The temple complex at the time of Jesus pretty much had been remodeled from Zerubbabel's time, and it was pretty much you could almost argue that Herod rebuilt it, and it was a very, very elaborate place, and Herod did it, although a lot of the Jews didn't really like Herod anyway. But he did a lot of work. So he was a follower. So he would have been in the town for Passover. Passover was one of the 3 times that every Jewish male was supposed to present themselves to the Lord and bring sacrifices to the temple. Okay, and so if he was a Jewish proselyte, which Herod was, he would have been there. And so he was glad and Herod was glad, for he had long desired to see him because he had heard about him, and he was hoping to see some sign done by him. So he questioned at some length, but made no answer. And the chief priests and the scribes stood by vehemently accusing him. And Herod with his soldiers treated him with contempt and mocked him, and then arraying him in splendid clothing, he sent him back to Pilate. And Herod and Pilate became friends with each other that very day, for before this they had been at enmity with one another. Don't know why they would have become friends afterwards, because Pilate passes the buck to Herod. Herod's like, oh, I've been wanting to, this guy's been notoriety in my area. I want, and so, but there's a change. He wanted to see him. He wanted to question him, but then Herod and his guards treat Jesus badly. Okay, and they dress him up and they send him back to Pilate. They dress him up as king, I guess, or ridicule him, and they send him back to Pilate. And then so it's kind of like Pilate probably sent him back and said, yeah, he's done some stuff in my jurisdiction, but they're bringing him to you because he stirred things up in Jerusalem, in the temple, and the money changers, and that's your jurisdiction, Pilate. And so I don't know. That's if their law, if their system worked like our system, and it doesn't necessarily. But Pilate then called together all the chief priests and the rulers and the people, and said to them, you brought me this man as one who was misleading the people. And after examining him before you, behold, I did not find the man guilty of any of your charges against him. Neither did Herod, for he sent him back to us. Look, nothing deserving death has been done by him. I will therefore punish and release him. This is pretty level-handed of the Roman government. This is it's easy to kind of draw this idea that don't get me wrong, depending on various times in history, the Romans were very ruthless in those areas that they conquered, and later on they are ruthless when they destroy the temple. But it would not be uncharacteristic for them to kill somebody without a fair trial. It would not be uncharacteristic for them to say, oh, he's stirring up rebelliously. Man, boom. Or you said something bad against a Roman or against Caesar, boom, boom. But for some reason, Pilate and both Herod I kind of wonder if they kind of liked the grief that Jesus was bringing to the religious leaders. You know what I mean? He's stirring things up. He's challenging the religious leaders who think that they know everything. And so just because and so I think Pilate's saying, just because he's your enemy doesn't make him my enemy. Okay. And so, but then they were vehemently, why I can't say that, I don't know. Vehemently. It's because there's an H in there and I want to pronounce that H. Vehemently, they were vehemently against it. And we see that eventually is what, the fear of a crowd, the fear of a riot. Because what happens to Pilate if the Jews riot? Well, he gets called before Caesar. Well, you didn't keep calm in the area I gave you to govern, and therefore, and heads would roll. And so he says there's, let's pick up in verse 18. But before we do, it's like, was all of this by our legal process? We would say, no, it was not illegal. But we have some concepts in our legal process that are unfair for us to judge them at that point in time. The idea of a trial by your peers is not something that was done at that time. An idea of actual facts being established was not that important. There was trouble. People were getting upset. And they brought him before the ruler, and the ruler, whatever he said, would go. And he had to make a decision. Okay? And so some would say they brought trumped up charges to Jesus. Yes, they did. He didn't say that about Caesar. But in their mind, he was stirring things up. Okay? Now, if it had been Roman citizens and Roman soldiers who were bringing him before with a case that he stirred up things and they took him in arrest, kind of like they did Paul later on, and Paul had to appeal to his Roman citizenship to get out of that, because if you were a Roman citizen, you had more rights than if you weren't. Jesus was not a Roman citizen. Okay, and so by the sense of the Roman government, he was expendable for the sake of peace. You know what I mean? So for the sake of peace, that's what Jesus is going to lose his life, basically, from Pilate and Herod's perspective, which is kind of interesting when you think about it, because Jesus actually goes and dies for the sake of peace, spiritual peace, the peace of our soul being, so for the sake of peace, he is our sacrifice, that we would have peace with God, and that we would come back into communion with him through him. So that's kind of interesting, just a little slightly different perspective. But they all cried out together, "Away with this man, release to us Barabbas." Now this is Luke. Luke is one of the four Gospels, which we have as the first four books in the Christian New Testament, what we call the New Testament. It's one of what we call one of the three synoptic Gospels, in that John's the one that's not the synoptic, in that Matthew, Mark, and Luke carry the similar timeline, the similar stories, and all. So if you really want to get the full-blown effect of what happened, you read what happened at the trial in both Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Okay, because we know that in one of those others it mentions that Pilate, in trying to please them, said, "Hey, it's customary that we release one prisoner to you. It's a goodwill gesture that we make. We release one. Who you want me? You want me to release Barabbas, or do you want me to release Jesus?" And Pilate does this thinking that Jesus is the much better option than Barabbas, and that they would pick Jesus and they would calm down and all that. No, it doesn't happen. And we see Luke picks it up, even though he doesn't tell us anything about Barabbas, but he picks it up and they say, "Away with this man, release to us Barabbas, a man who had been thrown into prison for an insurrection started in the city for murder." And Pilate addressed them once more. Give us a real murderer. And take this murderer, who we trumped up charges, who's not a real murderer, Jesus, and crucify him. Okay? I've always found that the whole trial scene, the whole last days of Christ, the whole here Jesus, does Jesus die for the sake of murderers? Well,
Along with a lot of people.
he died for all of us, all who have sinned. Okay, but even before he actually gets to the cross, he's saving a murderer. When you think about it, because Barabbas gets off scot-free, he gets a pardon, and you and I get a pardon because of Christ too. So Pilate addressed them one more time, desiring to release Jesus, but they kept shouting, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Now, you've talked about the crowd and the idea that their courts were not like our courts. You know, you go down to the courthouse, you can go in and watch cases and all if they're open and all, but you're not allowed to speak, and it's quiet and there's not that many rooms. But these sort of things were a public spectacle. Okay, these sort of things would it would be like as if Pilate was up on a platform and then there were all these people and accused on the steps. Okay, so this was like early Survivor Island or early TV. It was a spectacle, and this is, and the Romans were not, the Romans didn't miss spectacle. Remember, they had the whole Colosseum and the gladiators and all that, and so all the people that had slowly gathered, because there's a lot of people in Jerusalem at this time, and they're all, what's going on? Something's going on down here. But they've got Jesus and ask, blah blah blah. They come, and to me, and I've looked at this, they yelled out, "Crucify!" Just a few days earlier, when he came in what we call the triumphal entry, the whole crowd was enamored with joy and the party of a celebrity coming in. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And now, crucify him.
And that's the reason I question. I thought some of these were the same people.
They are. I believe they are. I believe the crowd. They're the peer group. They're the crowd, the massless, unidentifiable people of the crowd. The fans, we call them that in sports, the fan. Okay, Jesus has gone from having a great fan base to having a terrible fan base, so to speak. Why? Because they were more interested in becoming the fan base of the religious leaders, the Pharisees and all of that. Aren't we fickle?
Yeah.
You know, I can remember in high school, did you ever have those friends that were friends with you when the popular people weren't around, but when the popular people were there, they were friends with them and acted like they didn't know you? Bingo, there's the people that were gathered in Jerusalem. And before I get too critical, I'm just like them. We get caught up in the moment. We get caught up, crucify him, crucify him. And crucify him. The leaders say we need to holler, crucify him. And they're probably they're yelling it. Have they thought through the consequences? And a third time he said to them, "But why? What evil has this man done?" He hasn't done anything. Jesus came, he lived a sinless life. And even Pilate knew it. Mm-hmm. Okay? I have found in him no guilt deserving death. I will therefore punish and release. What he means by punish is beat him up and release him. Beat him within an inch of his life and release him. But they were urgent, demanding with loud cries that he should be crucified, and the voices prevailed. We live in a world where the voices prevail, don't we? Whoever can make the most noise, whoever can be the ugliest, whoever can throw hate around the most. If you don't believe that, just take a look at elections and politics and all that. Because that's what this was. This was religious politics. When you mix religion and politics, you really get a volatile concoction. And so Pilate decided that their demand would be granted and released the man who had been thrown into prison, that being Barabbas, for an insurrection and murder for whom they asked. But he delivered Jesus over to their will, not his will, their will. And in one of the other synoptic gospels, he says, he does this symbolic thing of washing his hands. Do you think Pilate could totally wash his responsibility away that way and say, well, the crowd? No, I don't think so. I don't think so. We're all just either we're in the crowd yelling crucify him, or we're trying to stay neutral, washing our hands like Pilate. But every single one of us has to make a decision what to do with Jesus. Okay? Are we going to follow him as Savior, or are we not going to follow him as Savior? And so we move on to the really heavy. Chapter 23 is pretty heavy. And as they led him away, they seized one, Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country, and laid on him the cross to carry it behind Jesus, because Jesus had stumbled. Typically, those that were being crucified had to carry their own cross. Why? Because the Roman government, I'm not going to carry it for you. Here, you do it. You know what I mean? The soldiers, and that was just part of the humiliation. Okay, part of the whole thing. Crucifixion was designed to be an example. It was very oppressive in nature. It was very much shameful. It was very much a control device. Okay.
They didn't actually carry the whole cross.
It's probably just the top beam.
The cross beam.
Yeah, it's probably the cross beam.
Was already there.
That is one theory. Now, we've never actually found the entire cross, but typically you will see it portrayed as carrying the one beam or what, or because some of them believe that the cross was made, and that you had those your beams up, and then this cross beam you were attached to, and then you were put and slid down and slammed down. Okay, or the others that they think that there are some that hold that it was an actual cross, but then when you raised it up and it slid down the hole, that would be a jerking on the body. Either way, the beam was heavy, and Jesus was probably a pretty stout young guy. He was probably about 33, we believe 34. But he'd already been beaten to an inch of his life, okay? And so he was fatigued. And what is it? He's 100% man. He's going to be just as tired as any of us, And so he stumbles. And so they get Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country, and they laid on him the cross to carry it behind Jesus. And there followed him a great multitude of people and of women who were mourning and lamenting for him. Okay, what happened to his disciples? Where are they lamenting and mourning?
Not there.
Where they're I get the feeling they're hiding.
Yeah.
Or because why? Because they think,
It's gonna happen
We're
now.
all
Of course,
gonna die with
in
him.
all fairness, before we get too down on the disciple guys, didn't Jesus tell them earlier that, hey, there's going to come a time you're going to need your swords?
Oh.
Wouldn't that kind of appear like this might be a good time? Because what happens if there's an insurrection? They're going to go after all those in the insurrection too. So they might be thinking, okay, they're going to get Jesus now, and then they're coming after us to clean up that thing. And didn't Jesus also talk about, are you not able to take the cup that I drink from the cup that I am able to drink? And he says, you will. And people hate me, they're going to hate you more. So yeah, So anyway, but turning to them, Jesus said, daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For behold, the days are coming when they will say, blessed are the barren and the wombs that never bore and the breasts that never nursed. Then they will begin to say to the mountains, fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. For if they do these things when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry? there's a prophetic word from Jesus, even on the way to the cross.
I'm
One-
not sure I
I
understand
don't
that.
understand.
I was gonna say.
Do what?
but
I don't know that I
understand it.
understand that sentence.
What? That it's prophetic, or that it's
Well, that, do this.
the whole statement? Blessed are the barren.
Cover us for that. They do this when the wood is green. What?
What verse are we in?
When he's talking about the wood is green, Jesus is with them
Verse is that, yeah.
right now. And what did he tell? What did he tell? I think about when they came to Jesus and said, "Look, John's disciples are fasting, and the Pharisees fast." And what did he say? He said, "Don't expect my disciples to fast while the bridegroom is with them." Okay, but there will come a time when the bridegroom's on. The trees are green, okay, but after Jesus dies, that's kind of when the drought is going to be. That's the way I interpret that. But the idea of woe is me, be thankful that you didn't give birth, and it almost goes along with that is the idea of be thankful that you weren't, pray that you weren't born at all. I think that's a twofold bit of prophecy. I think that's a prophecy for the current time. They're fixing to see Jesus die and be raised again, and but there's also going to come a time, you read Revelation and you read about the end times, there will come a time when this ultimately will be fulfilled, and when there will be a time when Jesus comes again, and there will be those that didn't accept him, the daughters of Jerusalem, the Jewish people, those that weren't aware of Jesus at this time, those that, when we looked at Acts, we talked about how the gospel came to the Jewish nation first, but they ultimately as a nation rejected it, and therefore then it moved on to the Gentiles. So I think that's a little bit in here. Of course, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children, for behold, the day is coming. Do not weep for me. Of course, he knows he's divine. He knows this is according to a plan. He knows, but he also knows that what will happen to those that follow. Okay, and ultimately, when Christ comes again, if you don't find yourself in the camp of having accepted Christ as your Lord and Savior, you're going to have, I believe, and the Bible talks about being separated from God, and being placed in, through the judgment process, being placed in hell. Okay, those are, and even there will be those that knew about Jesus, that knew of the law, that were raised and all, but had not truly accepted him. They'll be separated. Okay. I also remember when Jesus first comes into triumphal entry, what does he say about Jerusalem? He says, "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, oh, that I could be like a hen and gather you under my protective wings." Jerusalem's it's not just a city. It's symbolic, and it represents the covenant relationship with Israel itself. Jerusalem, the temple was there, which represented the special presence of God, although he was present everywhere. The special presence of God, the special favor, the special that these were those that had been redeemed out of Egypt. Okay, and yet they've had the Passover. Only the second time they're not going to have the protection of the Passover because they didn't accept Christ the Lamb. Okay, whereas those that have accepted Christ symbolically have the blood of Christ on our mantle and our lintel, and so he's like, don't worry, don't worry about me, worry more about yourself. Okay, the hills fall on us. These are just statements. When you're going through a hard, I think about the book of Job, and his wife says, "Why can't you just curse God and die? And why don't you, and he prays that, like, well, I wish I'd never seen the day I was born, Sometimes we get so caught up in life, we think it would be better if the mountain just hopped up and landed on me, right? And I could disappear or whatnot. That's a place of hopelessness. And you look around our world, a lot of people are already in that place, aren't they? And they need, and in Jesus's mind, I think at this point, he's like, y'all aren't catching on what's going on here. You know, I've told my disciples and all, and yet it's not until after he's resurrected that they start putting the pieces together, you know. And so he's just, and all throughout his ministry, he uses that weird term, let those that have ears hear and those that have eyes. And, you know, you can almost hear him saying, you know, you got ears and you got eyes, and yet you're weeping for me. And I'm weeping for you. That's why I'm going to the cross, is for you. I'm weeping for you. And so, verse 32, but I don't understand all of that. Most of the time, I don't understand all of prophecy because there's many folds to it, many aspects to it. There's a future sense to it, but there's a present sense also. 2 others who were criminals were led away to be put to death with him. And when they came to the place that is called the Skull, there they crucified him, and the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. And Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And they cast lots to divide his garments, and the people stood by watching. But the ruler scoffed at him, saying, He saved others, let him save himself. If he is the Christ of God, the chosen one. And the soldiers mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine and saying, If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself. And there was also an inscription over him that said, This is the king of the Jews. And one of the criminals who was hanged railed at him, saying, Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us. But the other rebuked him, saying, Do you not fear God, because you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we are receiving the due reward for our deeds, but this man has done nothing wrong. And he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And he said to him, Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise. To me, this is an extremely important passage. We see that there's 2 criminals, and you know it was production to crucify, so that we got these other okay. This is you know, you got KP duty, you got crucifixion duty, you got, you know, whatever you're assigned to as a soldier. So they took the other 2 with them, and they put one on each side. And some of the other gospel says that both the criminals railed at him. But somewhere along the line, the way Jesus behaved or something, the one criminal realized that he wasn't guilty. Maybe he'd heard something about Jesus. Okay, so it's interesting to me. Pilate could perceive that Jesus did nothing, and this criminal could perceive that Jesus did nothing. Okay, and yet the other one says, if you're the Christ, save yourself and us. Well, he wasn't really interested in Jesus saving Jesus. He was interested in Jesus saving him, right? It's like, hey, if you'll do this for me, I'll buddy up with you. And unfortunately, you kind of have those same reactions today. Those that come to Jesus and expect Jesus to save them, as in, save me from the consequences of my life and the things that I've done. Save me, and we see this time and time again. When people are in crisis points, they're more open to salvation. They're more open to Christ. But some of them are open with the wrong motivation. I think sometimes I think but some people accept Christ conditionally, because then you see them later on. They're like the seed that is thrown and choked out by the weeds, or is thrown on the ground that is eaten. They accept Christ, and then all of a sudden, you mean I don't I don't get everything in the world because I'm a Christian. I'm not prosperous. I'm not a millionaire. I'm not. Life is still giving me a hard time, and they're disillusioned and they fall by the wayside. And so I think that's kind of this one. We don't come to God with our demands. We don't come to God and say, God, I'm sinful. I'm horrible. You have to save me. We come to God, and God says, because I love you, let me give you this gift. And we come like the one that says, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Remember me. Don't forget me. I know I'm not done anything good, but don't forget me. And so to me, the one criminal who does that, and what is Jesus immediately reassures him. He says, truly today you will be with me in paradise. There are those that look at this passage and they talk about, we have the whole theological concept. Is there a paradise? Is there a place, a holding place? Is there soul sleep? Is there any of that? I don't know if that supports that or any of that, but what I know is to be with God, to be with Jesus is paradise. And to be separated from him is hell. Whatever that may be. Because we were what? Created in the very image of God. And when we do become spiritual beings after our death, when we no longer have the physical body to interfere with our viewpoints and all, we will realize what a great loss that we've had by rejecting Christ. We will realize what a great loss that we have incurred to ourselves because we haven't reconciled through the blood of Christ to God. And so, does this mean this guy on the cross was saved? The one that asked him to remember him? Is that what that means? Was he baptized?
Baptism isn't a requirement.
I think he was saved.
Oh, it's not a requirement? I'm being really smart aleck, but no. He was saved. He was saved. Jesus said, you will be with me. That's all I need to hear. You will be with me. Because that's all I want to be. I want to be with Jesus. I got a lot of questions. I got a lot of things to learn. But you will be with me. The little kid, where are you going? Well, you'll be with me. My dog, I know I'm doing a stretch. My dog Scarlet, she's a little Boston Terrier. My wife has gone to Seminole to be with her dad. He fell and broke his hip, and she's taking care of him. And I used to think my dog liked me the most. Judy would tell you that. I come home, and she comes, I let her out of the cage. She goes outside, and then she comes back in to see, and she's like, where's Mom?
Yeah.
Where's the other? I've been left with the spare human. Okay. I'm a little bit like that dog. I want to be with Jesus. I want to be with as many of my friends and church family as possible. I want to be with all the Christians and many people in the world. But when I get to heaven, and I know we have this idea, when you get to heaven, you're going to see your family, and it's going to be a great reunion and all, but I'm going to be like my dog. Oh, it's good seeing you, Dad. Where's Jesus? Because we're not going to have those Jesus is the ultimate reward. Jesus, being with God, that's paradise. And so it's instantaneous. Other parts of the Bible say to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. And that's the hope that we have. Okay, so let's continue on. I'm running out of time. 44, and it was now the 6th hour, and there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour, while the sun's light failed, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. And then Jesus, calling out in a loud voice, said, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And having said this, he breathed his last. Now when the centurion saw what had taken place, he praised God, saying, certainly this man was innocent. This is the guy. Okay. This is the guy, the guards, they gambled for his, they ridiculed him. Okay. So Pilate sees that he is innocent. A criminal on one side sees that he is innocent. A Roman centurion sees that he is innocent. And all the crowds that had assembled for this spectacle, when they saw what had taken place, returned home beating their breasts. And all his acquaintances and the women who had followed him from Galilee stood at a distance watching these things. And all these people who had just earlier been crying, crucify him, crucify him, this is going to be a great spectacle, went home beating their breasts. Oh, this was horrible. Why did this happen? Why did I get carried away? Why was I part of this? Sometimes sin does that to us. You know, it carries us along like a tsunami wave, and we're not realizing the damage it's doing. We're just being carried along with it, and we're going with the flow. And then afterwards, we look around and see the damage, and we regret.
It's the mob mentality.
Mob mentality, and then then they realize, because they get caught up in the moment, they get caught up with the crowd, they get caught up. We get caught up in sin. Okay, and so they see this, and and even Luke brings this out. That the curtain of the temple was torn in two, and one of the other Gospels says it was torn from the top to the bottom. Now, why is that significant?
It's historic.
The temple,
Because somebody on the ground couldn't.
right? That means it wasn't man, okay, but it was God tearing.
Right.
And not only that, but the temple, which is designed to remind us of the presence of God and the separation of man between the holiest of holies, and which nobody's allowed to go into but once a year. Where was this curtain? It separated the holy place from the holy of holies. Okay, and so I believe a good, correct interpretation of this, because the temple was a physical manifestation of what happens in worship and in relationship, okay? There's a separation between us and God, and the priests had to be that. Well, now, the curtain that separates the Holy of Holies, the Ark of the Covenant, had been torn, and therefore it was open to everybody. Through Christ and his sacrifice on the cross, we do not have to go through some priest to confess our sins, to be in relationship with God. Christ becomes our priest. Christ.
So I don't have to get up early on Sunday?
Well, you don't come from. I'm not a priest. And hopefully you don't come early on Sunday for the priest. You come early on Sunday to worship God. Okay? We don't come to the church to worship the pastor or any staff member. We don't come to because, and unfortunately, in some churches, some of those pastors may feel that way. Just as the Pharisees and the ones who put Jesus to death felt that their religious position entitled them to power and respect. You got to be careful.
Superiority.
And superiority, exactly. The ground is level at the cross. We are all welcome to the Lord's table, the table of communion. We are all welcome to make our own profession, to ask God to remember us. And so we're all responsible for our ultimate destination by what we choose and how we react to. And so he died, okay, and everybody left. And verse 50 says, and now there was a man named Joseph from the Jewish town of Arimathea, and he was a member of the council, a good and righteous man, who had not consented to their decision or action, and he was looking for the kingdom of God. And this man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then he took it down, wrapped it in a linen shroud, and laid him in a tomb cut in stone where no one had been laid. And it was the day of preparation, which means it was Friday, because Sabbath begins sundown on Friday, and Sabbath was beginning. And the woman who had, and the women, not woman, and the women, one little letter makes a big, and the women who had come with him from Galilee followed and saw the tomb and how his body was laid, and they returned and prepared spices and ointments. And on the Sabbath day, they rested according to the commandment. It's interesting. You see the women at the cross, you see the women after it hanging around, and you see them following to see what happens to the body of Jesus. The women didn't leave the body of Jesus until it was in the tomb. Joseph of Arimathea, it's interesting too, was part of the Sanhedrin, the council, and he did not consent to the death of taking Jesus to get the death penalty. He did not consent. He was looking for the kingdom. So sometimes it's easy for us to draw the conclusion all the Jewish people rejected Jesus. No, all the religious leaders were against Jesus. No, they weren't. Joseph and he goes and he asks. Now Jesus, did he have any property?
Maybe
He had
what he wore on his
he only
body.
had what he wore on, and the Roman guards gambled for that. So he,
That's right.
at this point, he came into the world with nothing, and he leaves with nothing, same as we do. He's experienced everything the same as we do, and yet one of his followers put him in a tomb that nobody had been in it before, and I went. There are two places, if you go to Jerusalem, there's a debate on which one's the place where Jesus was actually at the garden tomb. And both of them are kind of moving to me. They're both, I don't have to go to the exact place, but to see a tomb that could have easily have been where he was laid, it's kind of moving. But my faith doesn't rest on that because there's nobody in that tomb. We're going to see next week the resurrection. We're going to see this still. But Joseph of Arimathea lovingly takes, and they've basically run out of time before the preparation because you're not supposed to do any of that. What does Joseph of Arimathea do when he touches the body of Christ? He takes him down and he wraps him.
In the linen cloth.
What happens when you touch a dead body
You're
in the
unclean.
Jewish thing? You
You're
become unclean.
Unclean.
You become unclean for Sabbath, and so you don't want to do that in anything. But yet, Jesus meant so much to him. He was risking willingly to get his hands dirty, if you will, for the sake of Christ. Sometimes I wonder if in our Christian world, this is my little challenge statement, if we become too concerned with our status that we're not willing to risk getting our hands dirty for the sake of Christ. Tell me what you think. Leave me a comment down below. We'll see you next week.